Okay, so once again, I'm Minister Amanda. We're on the third part of the series entitled Satanic Destruction. We went through satanic agreements, where we went over how Eve entered into a satanic agreement when during the fall in the Garden of Eden. Then we went over satanic compensation, where we went through and we found out that the wages of sin are death and that Satan cannot bless you in any form. Only God can do that. So anything that we align ourselves up with Satan, it's coming in the form of a curse, and it's the wages of sin is death. And we broke that down. So today, I'm going to walk you through satanic destruction. We're going to be exploring how King Saul went from the height of being the very first king of Israel up into destruction where he unalived himself. So I have a lot of scriptures that I'm going to be going through, a lot of information that I'm going to be plugging in, but I want to walk you through this journey in the book of First Samuel, how he went to the highest heights of being the king over a great nation to the very depths and lows that he encountered. So I'm going to give you a little background about Israel before we get started, so I can just tell you what state they were in. So we already know at this point that Israel had been released, or God had released them from captivity from the Egyptians. They had made, Abraham had made a covenant with God that he'd be the father of many nations. Joseph had risen to power in Egypt, and that's actually how the Israelites were put into captivity. The Israelites actually traveled to Egypt because Joseph was there. He had risen to power. He had favor, but they had outnumbered the Egyptians so much that the Egyptians started to become fearful, and so they enslaved the Israelites. Of course, there was some sin in the mix and disobedience, and every time disobedience and sin arose with the Israelites, they always fell into captivity, oppression, death. It's just always been a total mess. So at this point, the Israelites are in enslavement. So we passed that point. Moses has delivered the Israelites. They've come out of Egypt. They did their 40 years in the wilderness. God raised up Joshua to take the Israelites into the new promised land. So we're past all that. So we're at the point where God raises up judges. So once Moses passed, Joshua kind of took over everything. They started divvying up different responsibilities within the nation of Israel. So once that happened, God started rising up different judges, and the judges would basically act like tribal leaders. There'd be deliverers. So Israel would have cycles of sin all the time. So they would get into captivity, then they cry out to the Lord. And they'll get into captivity because of sin, disobedience, worshiping other gods, just whatever the case may be. And they'll call out to God, and God will send a deliverer and get them out of it. And God's like, hey, stay straight, do the right things. And of course, Israel being disobedient, just like we have been over in our lifetime, they will continue to do the exact same thing. And so judges rose up within different time periods as Israel called out. Well, at this point, Israel no longer wanted to have judges. They didn't want to be led by judges. They wanted a king to rule them. They wanted one monarch to rule them. They no longer wanted God to just be the center of everything, ruling everything. They wanted a human man in the flesh to do that. So at this point, Samuel was the priest, head prophet, so to speak, you can say. And so God was speaking directly to him, giving him direct information. So Samuel brought the request to God and said, hey, the people of Israel want a king. And God was like, go back and tell them, hey, they can get this, but their sons and daughters are going to be hauled off to war. Their sons and daughters are going to be, their daughters are going to be working at the palace. They're going to have to give 10% of their everything that they make with their oxen or their grain. Ask them, do they really want to be ruled like that? And so Samuel bring it to the people, and the people are like, oh yeah, we don't have a problem with this. Let's do it. We really want to be like the other nations. We really want to do it. So God is like, okay, they don't want me to be king over them anymore directly. Let's go ahead and do it. So God appoints. So God tells Samuel, hey Samuel, we're going to go ahead, and I have a specific person that I want you to select to be the king. He's going to come up to you in a certain amount of days. You're going to handle it this way. You're going to tell him because this is the first king. Everybody knows that a king is coming because they've made a request of it. They just don't know who God is going to select at this point. The person that he selects is unaware of it as well. So that's why God had to instruct Samuel before King Saul was even notified. That's amazing how God already had stuff set in motion, and He does the same thing for us. But we just have to walk into it. Same thing happened with Saul. Saul came from very kind of humble backgrounds. He was from the tribe of Benjamin, and that was the smallest tribe within the nation of Israel. Smallest tribe. And also within that, they were the smallest family within the tribe. So they were itty bitty. So his particular family, they herded. He was a shepherd and he was a donkey keeper. So just imagine, he was a donkey keeper, he was a shepherd. God elevated him to the point of being the first king of the nation of Israel. That's an amazing elevation. He had no predecessor, he had no experience, he only had God. But God chose him and raised him up to be that. So if we go to 1 Samuel chapter 9 through 11, it gives us a detail of exactly. I'm not going to read all of it, but I will have a workbook out. I owe y'all one from last week. The other one is out from the first one, Satanic Agreements, but I do owe y'all one for Satanic Conversations. Y'all will have that next week, and you'll have this one the following week. So I'm just going to read a little snippet of it. It says, so God had already given them instructions, told Samuel, hey, this guy is going to be looking for his donkey. He's going to come ask you, had you seen it? Go ahead and pull him to the side and let him know that he has been anointed and chosen as the first king of Israel. So Samuel did everything that God told Samuel. It is exactly how it happened. God gave Samuel specific instructions to tell Saul to let him know, hey, you are being confirmed as the first king. We want you to be the first king. God has selected you to be the first king. So he told him a few things. He gave him some information. But one of the things that stuck out the most to me is that the Spirit of God came upon him mightily, and he prophesied among him. So that's 1 Samuel chapter 10, verse 9 through 10 in the Amplified. So it says, then it happened, when Saul turned his back to lead Samuel, God changed his heart. God put a new heart within inside of him. And all the signs came to pass that day. When they came to the hill, behold, a group of prophets met him, and the Spirit of God came upon him mightily, and he prophesied among them. That wasn't in his nature, that wasn't in his character, he wasn't from the Levite tribe, so this wasn't really a normal thing for people to see that. They were like questioning, who is this man? Isn't this Saul from the tribe of Benjamin? Like, what is really going on? So as we continue, we see that he's selected. So God selected him, he's been anointed. Now we have to bring it before the people because God always wants to make sure people have their own free will. So Samuel called all the tribes to him, and they say, hey, we got somebody, let's go ahead and let's make a selection. So they all selected Saul. This is the funny thing about it. Saul was missing. Saul was hiding in the baggage. He was humble. He was shy. He wasn't even boisterous. And you'll see as we go through this study that he definitely changes by the time we get to the end of it. But he was so humble and so meek. He was shy that no one could find him, to the point where the prophets in there started praying for God to reveal where he was. And they said, okay, the Lord says he's hiding in the baggage. So they bring him out the baggage and they say, hey, he's the one that we're selecting. But even then, he still has not walked in his full role, his full position that God placed him in. It actually took a battle for him to even step to be fully embedded in it, because Israel, even though they came in and they agreed that, hey, we're going to select this man, they still were all broken up and dispersed. And that's part of the reason why they wanted a king. The tribes that were on the outlying sides of the nation of Israel, they were being attacked a lot because they had a lot of different enemies. When God gave them the promised land, the Israelites cleared out a lot of people and they had a lot of enemies. But also there were still people that were left behind in those areas, and they had remnants, and so those people would grow up, they would repopulate, or they would come from different areas, and they would come in and attack them from different sides. And that's one of the reasons why the tribe of Benjamin was small, because they were kind of on the outskirts of everything as well. So we, so once that happened, they kind of go back and do their own little thing in their own little areas. But something crazy happened. One of the tribes that I mentioned, they were on the outskirts. They were being taunted, they were being killed, they were like at war with them. And the people of that specific tribe said, hey, we'll surrender to you. We don't have a problem surrendering to you. And the man's like, okay, you can surrender to me, but I'm gonna gouge you lose one of your eyes. Everybody that surrenders to me, they become subject to me as our nation as a slave, and they lose one of their eyes. So that particular tribe calls out, and they say, hey, we need help. We're in trouble. And the message gets back to Saul. This war seals his seat. This battle seals his seat as king. He unites all of Israel through this. And this is all God orchestrating all of this stuff. But once he heard about it, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Saul, and he's in the field still working. He's in the field working with oxen. And he sent messages out to the other tribes. The Spirit of the Lord comes out, and a boldness came over Saul. He went from hiding in the baggage during the selection process to commanding over 330,000 men during this battle. And he won. It was against the Amorites. And he was able to, Ammonites, he was able to be victorious. And that particular thing sealed it sealed him. So in 1 Samuel 11, 8 through 11, it's in the Amplified. It says, Saul assembled and counted them at Bezek, the sons of Israel, 300,000, and the men of Judah, 30,000. They said to the messengers who had come, this is what you shall do, says the men of Jabesh Gilead. Tomorrow, by the time the sun is hot, you will be rescued. So the messengers went and reported this to the men of Jeshab, and they were overjoyed. Okay, so the men of Jeshab said to the Ammonites, tomorrow we will come out to you to surrender, and you may do to us whatever you seems good to you. The next morning, Saul put the men into 3 companies, and they entered the camp in the morning watch. That's between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., and they struck down the Amorites until the middle of the day. The survivors scattered, so there were no 2 of them were to get left together. So his strategy was so efficient, it was so boldly thought out and put together, that he was able to annihilate that group, the Ammonites, and able to rescue them. So, all right. So that sealed his authority, and that sealed his victory in the united Israel. So I'm just going to so that's just kind of what led up to everything. So Saul reigned as king for a few years. So now we're going to start getting into his rebellion, his disobedience, and what kind of led him to have some issues. So the very first battle that they encountered, Saul at this point had been ruling for a couple of years. So let's see. Okay, so Saul was 30 years old when he began his reign, and he reigned for 42 years over Israel. Saul chose for himself 3,000 men of Israel. 2,000 were with him in Mashah and on the hill of Bethel, and 1,000 with his son Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. So basically, they're about to go up against the Philistines yet again. They always were a thorn in the side of Israel. So Jonathan is his son, and Jonathan actually ended up becoming a very dear friend, almost to a brother of King David, who would take the place of King Saul. So they're starting off in battle, and Jonathan, his son, he go and take the garrison. He takes the 1,000 that he got, and they go take out the garrison. They blow the horn. But the people of Israel are petrified. They've been fighting the Philistines since they come out of Egypt. They are very skilled. They have blacksmiths. They're very talented warriors. And every time Israel has faced them, they have been very terrified. So when the Philistines came out, they had 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen. They said that when they saw them, that the people were as sand on the beach. on the seashore, shall I say. So I'm going to go up to verse 6. When the men of Israel saw that they were in a tight situation, for their troops were hard pressed, they hid in caves, in thickets, in cliffs, in pits, and in dry wells. Some of the Hebrews even had crossed the Jordan into the land of Gad and Gilead. But as for Saul, he was still in Gilgad, and all the people followed him were trembling. They were petrified. They were afraid. So at this point, Samuel was supposed to come meet up with Saul, make a burnt offering, make a peace offering before they go into war. Every time they've done that, every time Samuel has done that, and the nation has not been in a state of sin or disobedience, they've been victorious. So I think everybody's afraid. Everybody's concerned. Samuel hadn't showed up just yet. So Saul looks out and he's starting to notice that his troops are starting to dwindle down. He's noticing that they're afraid. Everybody with him are terribly afraid. Then he starts to see that Samuel has not arrived. He's supposed to be there in 7 days. He did not show up. He had not showed up as of yet. So Saul took it upon himself to offer a burnt offering and a peace offering, and that got him in trouble. Burnt offerings are only supposed to be offered by priests. There's a specific bloodline, which was the Aaron bloodline, the Levites. These are the ones that God had designated throughout the history of the Israelites to make those sacrifices, to make those burnt offerings. No one else should be doing that at all. And basically, burnt offerings were presented. It was most likely an animal or something like that. It's to seek God's favor before a battle in His presence. It was a sin offering to deal with any defilement among the Israelites. It was also to request prophetic blessings or directions by battle, so it provides strategies. And it also was considered a very sacred act because God gave very specific instructions about who He wanted to do it, how He wanted to do it, what animals to use. He was very specific about that. If you look in Leviticus 1 and 5 in the King James Version, you'll be able to read, well, the sons of Aaron, the Levites, were the ones that did the burnt offerings. If you go all the way down to verse 9, they said that why they were bringing the burnt offerings. So, I'm going to go with that. So, as Saul is doing the burnt offering, Samuel the prophet arrives, and he is upset. Because he automatically knows, hey, you're not supposed to be doing this. I told you I was coming. At the conclusion of him doing the burnt offering, Samuel shows up. Talking about timing. You have to make sure that you're walking in alignment with God, and you have to make sure you keep, no matter how it looks, no matter how oppressed it looks, we have to keep going. We have to remain steadfast in whatever the Lord told us to do last. He should not have moved. He should not do the burnt offerings. Fear came upon him. He wasn't trusting fully in the Lord, even though he had seen so many different victories over the lifetime of the Israelites. So when Samuel arrived, he's definitely upset. So Samuel's like, what have you done? What foolish thing have you done? And Saul's response, King Saul's response is, he saw the people scattering, and he was like, okay, I'm losing people. Samuel did not come at the appointed time. The Philistines were gathering, preparing to march on them. And he felt like the Philistines would come down, and he hadn't asked God for favor. Well, Proverbs 14 and 12, the English Standard Version, said there's a way that seems right to men, but the way ends in death or destruction. And that's exactly what ended up happening to Saul. So Saul saw with his eyes, he thought, he felt, he was fearful, but he didn't fully believe or trust or rely on God. No matter all the victories that he saw the Lord pull Israel through, just the most recent victory from him when he first was securing his throne, he saw that how God gave him victory and strategy over that. And if he wanted to look back ancestrally, he can see that Israel versus Egypt, God was victorious and they were outnumbered then. The Canaanites with the Jericho wall, with Joshua, they didn't even have weapons. They used their faith and was victorious. The battle of Gibeon with Joshua, with the 5 kings of Amorites, they all joined forces. And God caused confusion to come amongst them, hailstones, and he even stopped the sun. That's, he stopped a natural thing that has never happened again in our lifetime, but he stopped it just for the Israelites. So there are also the other victories against the Philistines that happened. So God has been very active and protective over Israel, and he had to take things into his own hands. He couldn't just wait. I know it may have looked like he was being defeated, but God had the situation at hand. And we know that even though we may say, hey, come do this, God has his own time and timing. There may have been a specific reason why Samuel hadn't made it there yet. And maybe God was trying to see if he can trust Saul into that capacity, and clearly he couldn't. So when we get into things, we got to make sure that we're walking by faith and not by sight, because things are, or any of our senses, because these things could be very manipulative. We have to stand on the word, and we have to trust the word of the Lord. So that was Saul's first mess up, his first phase, and we're going to see how he progresses over time. So his second one, where he messed up on the second side of it, that is in 1 Samuel 15, and that's going to be verses 3 through 9. Okay. Now the Lord has given him very specific instructions. Now go and completely, and this is Samuel 15, 3 through 9, the New Living Translation. Now go and completely destroy the entire Amalekite nation, men, women, children, babies, cattle, sheep, goats, camels, and donkeys. So Saul mobilized his army. He had 200,000 soldiers from Israel and 10,000 men from Judah. So they went down to the Amalekites, and they lay wait in the valley. So I'm just going to kind of give you a higher level of everything. So they defeat the Amalekites. He captures the king. God didn't tell him to capture the king. He said, annihilate them, get rid of everybody. So you're already messing up. Then his men start sparing animals. So they spared the sheep, the oxen, the fat ones, the lambs. And then they started taking the spoils. Anything that wasn't already tore up or raggedy, they kept all the good stuff, and they only destroyed the bad stuff. God said everything that they own must be destroyed. Nobody left living. Nothing they own, no animal, no possessions, no humans. God wanted everything gone. But they weren't willing to destroy it. They only destroyed the worthless and undesirable things. So this is diabolical. But when we look at 1 Samuel 15 through 34, God wakes up Samuel and he says, hey, we got to talk about this. And God's like, I regret the day I made Saul king over Israel. Because Israel is God's special heart. Now, we're a part of Israel as well through the new covenant, but that was his special people. And God's like, I regret even making him king of Israel. He's turned away from me, and he's not following my commandments. You know, that we seem like even if we just kind of follow it, that we'll be okay. But God is requesting full obedience, not partial obedience. Partial obedience is still full disobedience, because we need to follow it to the T. So even though he did get rid of all the people that he said except the king, he still wasn't in full obedience. Even though they only kept the good stuff and they got rid of the bad stuff, he still was in full disobedience. God wants full obedience. And so Samuel comes down there to Saul, and while Samuel is going down there to Saul, Saul is in a joyful, happy mood. He's actually having a monument erected based on his victory with the Amalekites. He's proud of this victory. Even though he's in disobedience, he's proud of it. They're building a monument. And so Samuel just comes straight out and say, hey, why didn't you obey the Lord? Why didn't you listen to what the Lord told you? And in verse 20 of that, this is Saul's response. But I did obey the Lord, Samuel insisted. I carried out the mission he gave. I brought back King Ag, but I destroyed everyone else. Then my troops brought in the best of the sheep, goats, cattle, and plunder to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal. He didn't ask them to do that. God has created all of this stuff. He doesn't want that stuff. He wanted the obedience. That's what he wanted. When God tells us to do something, we have to do it in full obedience. So he says, I did obey. I just brought back the king. I just told a little lie. That's kind of how ours go. Or I just took some of the spoils. God instructs you to give a certain amount and you give up to a certain amount or you don't give it to where he tells you to give it to, then you're in disobedience. God didn't want that stuff. And if you go down to verse 23, it says, obedience is better than sacrifice. We probably heard that growing up. We probably heard it in church. But it's the truth. God wanted his obedience. So, in verse 24, then Saul finally admits it. He's having a little disagreement with him. He's saying, I did do it. So I guess he finally gave in, but I feel like it's a sarcastic gave in. Then Saul admitted to Samuel, yes, I've sinned. I disobeyed your instructions and the Lord's command, for I was afraid of what the people and did what they demanded. We cannot give in to pressures of everybody else. We have to only give in to the instructions and commands of the Lord, or we end up in a situation like this. So this is why I feel like it was a condescending, just like, come on, hurry, let's get this out the way so we can go on to the next part of what's going on. So once he admitted in verse 25, he says, but now, please forgive my sins and come back with me so that I may worship the Lord. Saul had a problem where he liked to look good in front of people, and he didn't mind how the back end looked. And sometimes our stuff is like that too. It's okay how we look on the outside, and the inside we toe up. Do we look like we're okay, even though we're not in right standing with the Lord? Can we present a good face? And God requires that inside stuff, because that's the stuff we really look at. You don't care about, God does not care about all this exterior stuff. He really has a concern for how our heart is. And disobedience is definitely a sign of a heart that's not turned to the Lord. So he just wants, hey, let's hurry up and brush over this. Yes, I made a mistake. Yes, I listened to the people. But hey, let's go ahead and push past this. And you'll see as we go through that Saul really just always wanted to look good. So Saul started off as humble and meek, hiding in the baggage area, to prideful, rebellious, and fearful of God, and not fearful of man, and not fearful of God. So that's a drastic change in a short period of time. And within that, we already see that he took on a sacred act that he shouldn't have with doing the sacrifices. We see that he was in rebellion and disobedience right off. So we're going to move into what exactly happened from there. So once we go from there, he says, yes, I've sinned. As Samuel turned to go, Saul tried to hold him back and tore the hem of his robe. And Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, and he's given it to someone else, one who's better than you. And he who is the glory of Israel will not lie, nor will he change his mind, for he is not human, that he should change his mind. And then Saul began to plead, I know I've sinned, but please at least honor me before the elders of my people and before Israel by coming back with me, that I may worship the Lord your God. And that's what I'm saying. He wants to save face. He doesn't care really about how the relationship with God is, because he would have made it right. He didn't really genuinely want to fix things. He just wanted to make it look like he was okay with the Lord. So Samuel finally agreed, and he went back with Saul, and Saul worshiped the Lord. And so Samuel's like, hey, bring me the king that you brought. And the king is in good spirits, the one that he captured from the Amalekite. He's like, hey, I know that they're not about to unalive me. I know that I am straight and nothing's going to happen. But that's not true. Samuel had to finish out what Saul would not do. God, when you don't finish God's assignment and you turn to the left, God will rise up somebody else in your place, and you'll be watching from the sidelines. And whatever plan and progress God has next for you, unless you repent, and even then sometimes it can be too late. If you don't repent and turn away, you won't have access to those things. God won't give you those things. So, at this point, Samuel and Saul never see each other again. Samuel ended up dying later on throughout Saul's life, but he never gets to see Samuel again. And Samuel actually mourns and grieves behind Saul because he had a love and affection for Saul, especially being the first king of Israel. God's like, nope, we got to move on. We're moving on. So as he moves on, he anoints David. We all know the story of David being anointed, and that's in First Samuel chapter 16, verses 13 and 14. So we see that in verse 13, so David stood among his brothers. Samuel took the flask of olive oil he had brought and anointed David with the oil. And the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David from that day on. And then Samuel returned to Ramah. Now the Spirit of the Lord had left Samuel, and the Lord sent a tormenting spirit that filled him with depression and fear. So I am definitely in the midst of a study regards the Lord sending a tormenting spirit that filled Saul with depression and fear. I'm going to be very honest and transparent. I'm still in the midst of that study. So I don't want to share with you something that I haven't fully come into the full knowledge of. But I will say that thus far, I know that God doesn't send tormenting spirits based on what I've seen throughout Scripture. However, I don't have enough in the study to say concretely that this isn't so or if it's left or right. So I'm not going to deceive you or lie to you and say that. However, I will say that based on Job 1, 9 through 10, that when we go back and read that there is a level of protection. It says that basically Satan's talking to God and they're discussing Job. And it says in verse 10, you have always put a wall of protection around him, his home, and his property. You have made him prosper in everything he does. Look how rich he is. So I know that for sure God can put a hedge of protection around us, and he does put a hedge of protection around his believers, especially if you're in right standing with the Lord. So what I would say is that I'm not going to say definite, but I will say this, that maybe once the Spirit of the Lord left Saul, that the hedge of protection around him left, and that gave access for Satan to send in demonic spirits or tormenting spirits, depression, or fearful spirits. I will say that. When I come into the full truth and knowledge of everything, I will definitely share as the Spirit leads. Now, let's go ahead and see where Saul is. Okay, let's go ahead and see where Saul is, what state he's in. So we know that he lost his relationship with God. He lost his relationship with Samuel. His kingdom reign, his throne, he's lost that. He lost the Spirit of the Lord and everything that comes with it. So that means the wisdom, the favor, the strategy, his purpose, joy, peace. When the Spirit of the Lord came from off of him, he lost all those things. And that's generally how it happens to us as well. When we fall back into sin or we are not in the relationship with God, all those things fall off of us as well. Because God wants to bless us. He wants to prosper us. He wants us to have favor. He wants us to have the wisdom of the kingdom. He wants us to have strategy. He wants us to have joy and peace. But when we're not in alignment with him or we're in a state of sin, those things aren't applicable to us until we come back into right standing under the covenant, under the blood that Jesus shed for us. Okay? So, the spirit that came upon Saul, we're going to go ahead and jump to Samuel 16, 21 through 23. So, at this point, this spirit was tormenting the mess out of Saul. And some of his advisors said, hey, there's a man named David, the one that Samuel just anointed. There's something how God will pull you up and they'll put you in position as well so you don't make the same mistakes as the predecessor. You can see that, okay, this is the route he took. This is not good. We don't want to do this. So we can see that. So basically, Saul calls uh, Saul calls David to him because his servants say, hey, David, he can play the harp. He's a man of God, and he'll be able to get the evil spirit away from you. And so that's exactly what happens. So David went to Saul and began serving him. Saul loved David very much, and David became his armor bearer. And basically, what an armor bearer was back then, they would carry the armor for the king. They were very close. When the king go out to battle, the armor bearer would be right there with all of his weapons, his armor, whatever he needed, his shield, his sword, whatever was needed. So he maintained the weapons. The king would trust him because this is somebody. If the wrong thing happened to any of his battle equipment, he could die. And it shows favor. It shows closeness. So we can see how David and Saul's relationship started out. So David would come in and play the harp, also carry the weapons when he went into war, and the spirit would depart from Saul, and he would be able to focus and have peace and be able to think clearly. Now the spirit of the Lord still will not return, but the harp when David played would bring him relief. So remember the story of David and Goliath. Everybody was afraid of Goliath. He was a huge Philistine, and David went out there and he slayed him. They had so many victories. Not only did he slay them, they also had a great victory with all the remaining people that were part of the Philistine army. So I'm going to show you how Saul's heart changed out of jealousy and worrying about what people were saying, because David's heart never changed for Saul the entire time that Saul was alive. Even in his death, he continued to honor him. So they've won the war against the Philistines. They're returning back to the city. They're returning back home, and the women in the streets start singing a little tune. They're dancing, they're singing a tune. As they go from city to city, the women are singing this. It says Saul struck down 1,000 Philistines, and David struck down 10,000 Philistines. And that's in verse 7 of 18 in 1 Samuel chapter 18. So they said that this made Samuel very angry, that they gave credit with David of 10,000 and him only 1,000. And he said, next they'll be making him their king. Two things I want you to glean from that. Number one, God had already anointed David as king. And two, David didn't open his mouth and he wasn't loose lips to say, hey, I'm going to be the next king. Saul didn't even know that God anointed him and appointed him to be the next king, because he was in the role and the position that God placed him in, and he did it with honor and respect. Okay? So from that time, and this is verse 9, from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. So now we can add jealousy to the list. David wasn't doing anything sideways. David had just defended an entire nation. Everybody was petrified of Goliath, and the women are just singing and dancing, and David's not requesting it, but that's just what happens. So after that, we see right before Saul gets jealous and upset at 1,000 men for him and 10,000 for David, he had just appointed David as a commander in his army. He also had said that he wanted to stay at his right hand, and Saul was giving David different little tasks while they're out there on the battlefield, and everything that David did, he did it successfully. He did it with integrity. He did it to the best of his ability, and it was successful every single time. He outshined the rest of the commanders that were out there, and that's because of the hand of the Lord was upon him. And the same thing happened to believers. You don't have to try hard. You don't have to do all these great efforts. When the hand of the Lord is upon you, you just follow his lead, and he'll show you and direct you and guide you on which way you should go. So remember, Saul liked to look good in front of people, just like he told Samuel, just come out here in front of the people and in front of the elders. Let's just make it look good. Just make it look good. Don't worry about how it really is in the back. Let's just go ahead and let's go ahead and get past this. Same thing with the people. The people wasn't yelling out his name. They're yelling out David's name. And you know that David did a great feat. so much so that he made him a commander in his army. But he wanted that adoration. He wanted that reverence. He wanted to be adored like that. So we're going to look at verse 10. The very next day, I'm going to read from the New Living Translation. So this is 1 Samuel 18 and 10 through 11. The very next day. So as soon as they get in from them going from city to city, the ladies singing, the very next day, a tormenting spirit from God overwhelmed Saul, and he began to rave in his house like a madman. So he started crashing out in the house. David was playing the harp as he did each day, but Saul had a spear in his hand and suddenly hurled it at David, intending to pin it to the wall, but David escaped twice. So he was trying to sneak attack him. David just in there playing the harp, not just minding his business. He's thinking it's a normal day, but boy, something about the Lord giving you a heads up about things. Whew, thank the Lord. And all of a sudden, he threw two spears at him, two different spears, and he was able to evade him both times. And we go down to 1 Samuel 18 and 12. It says Saul was then afraid of David. So now, on top of all of those other things on the list, on top of the jealousy, we can add, now he's afraid of David because the Spirit of the Lord is upon him. For the Lord was with David and had turned away from Saul, and he became afraid because he know how great of things that God can do for a person and in a person's life. So we're going to continue down. So we see that David, this is verse 14, David continued to be successful in everything he did, for the Lord was with him. And the same thing applies to us. The Lord is with us. We're going to be successful. We're going to come out on top, no matter how it looks. If Saul could have kept that mindset, he would have been victorious as well, and he wouldn't have fallen into the sin and disobedience that he did when he made the burnt offerings, or when he came back with the spoils and the goats and all that stuff. So then again, he said, hey, now he's setting them up murderous plots. So rather than through the spear, wasn't successful. Now he's like, I'm about to send them out to battle with the Philistines. So he sends them out to battle. He says, if you bring me back 100 foreskins from the Philistines, I'll give you my daughter's hand in marriage. And David's like, what? I'm just a lowly man. How am I going to get a royal daughter? Your daughter. And so David goes out, and not only does he unalive and get the foreskins of 100, he brings back 200 foreskins. And Saul still crashing out. He realizes again that the favor of the Lord was upon David, and he becomes afraid again. He's afraid even more. So now at this point, he's just digging himself deeper and deeper and deeper. He's just being manipulative, thinking of ways to get rid of him. So he becomes more afraid. So as he continues to have his battles and victories and stuff like that, Saul's like, just get out of my face. I don't even want you here. Get out of my face. I don't want you here. Go out, take you a little 1,000 men and go battle. His name becomes famous around Israel and the surrounding nations and countries and things like that. And so he marries the daughter, and David's back home with the daughter, and Saul sends messengers to David's home to kill him. But he was able to evade. The wife put him out the window. He was able to escape. And we see how it continues to develop and develop. Once again, he's able to escape. They have a plan in place. But he also comes back again prior to this, and he throws a spear at his head. He throws another spear. He told his son Jonathan, hey, I'm not going to kill David. He hasn't done anything. I'm not going to kill David. Well, while Jonathan's sitting at the table, Saul lies. So now he's a liar. Of course he's going to be a liar. He's fallen into sin real bad, and that's just one of the symptoms of it. So I'm just going to kind of run down some of the exploits of Saul chasing David at this point. So we have David playing the harp again. David was so confident in the Lord because this man then threw this spear at him several times. He's been sent him to battle to try to get him killed, and he still trusts in the Lord and has enough gumption to play the harp. He's talking about divine protection and trusting in the Lord. This is a man with divine protection, trusting in the Lord. So in 1 Samuel 23:14 through 26, we see that Samuel chases David into the wilderness, but he's able to escape because the Philistines pop up, and of course we all know Saul's scared of the Philistines, so he's not even going to continue to pursue him. So that saves David that day. So after that, he's still chasing. He's the king. There are bigger things he could have been focusing his energy and time on than David, who has no intentions of hurting him, harming him, or causing any trouble. He just wants to live his life. He already knows that God has placed him on the throne. He's waiting for God's appointed time. So 1 Samuel 24:3 through 12, Saul's still chasing after David, but Saul's caught lacking. He caught lacking. So Saul had been hunting David for days on end, and so David receives news that Saul is in the area. So Saul is, let's see, let me see exactly where he is at this point. I can get y'all the, okay, there we go. Okay, so basically at this point, Saul has hid himself inside of a cave. So David and his men were hiding, but they were further back in the cave. Saul didn't even know that. So David's men is like, hey, we're about to get Saul today. We're about to have him one and done. Saul not about to keep chasing us. He's not about to keep harassing us. We're about to kill him. But Saul knows that when God appoints somebody, you don't want that blood on your hand for it to be on yours. So David would never kill Saul. So they're like, hey, it's your opportunity to go up on a goal. So that's one thing definitely different between Saul and David. Saul probably just did it. David was like, y'all not about to pressure me. This is what we're about to do. And that displays the character of a leader and a king. He says, it's verse 4, now your opportunity, David's men whispered to him. Today the Lord is telling you, I will certainly put your enemies into your power to do with as you wish. They have their line on the Lord. So David crept forward and cut off a piece of the hem of Saul's robe because Saul's knocked out sleep. But then David's conscience began bothering him because he had cut Saul's robe. He had not even did any damage, harmed, or anything. Just cutting the robe brought a conviction to him. He said this to the men, the Lord forbid that I should do this to my Lord the king. I shouldn't attack the Lord's anointed one, for the Lord himself has chosen him. I want to tell you guys, just reading that, when you're going through anything and you have any enemies or people coming up against you, just know that there's consequences for them coming up against you. There are consequences for them coming up against you. And David knew that it was consequences. God chose him, God anointed him, and he wasn't going to go there. So David restrained his men and did not let them kill Saul. After Saul had left the cave and gone on his way, David came out and shouted after him, my Lord, the king. And when Saul looked around, David bowed low before him. And then he shouted out to Saul, why do you listen to the people who say I'm trying to harm you? He always listening to the wrong people and the wrong thing. He never put his trust in the Lord. So even then, David comes in very lowly. He says, this very day you can see with your own eyes it isn't true. For the Lord placed you at my mercy back there in the cave. Some of my men told me to kill you, but I spared you. For I said I will never harm the king. He is the Lord's anointed one. Look, my father, even with endurement, what I have in my hand is a piece of your hem of your robe. I cut it off, but I did not kill you. Okay, so we can see that David doesn't want anything to do with killing him. He just literally just want to live his best life. So we see another time. Saul's out there sleeping in the opening, still chasing after David. David minding his own business. Once again, caught lacking, and David walks upon him. And he's like, hey, he says, hold on one second. So basically, he's sleeping. Saul's sword is in the ground in front of him. David comes and takes his spears in front of him. He takes the spear. He takes the water that's out there. And when they wake up, he's like, I didn't have any harm that I was going to do to you. I didn't want to do any harm to you. Please stop chasing after me. Please stop. Please stop trying to harm me. I'm not here for that. David spares his life again. But this time, after this happened, he's like, hey, I'm not going to harm you. This is Saul talking to David. I'm not going to harm you. I'm not going to do anything to you. I promise this time. But David was like, you know what? We're not even about to put up with this. After that last encounter, David goes into the Philistines' land, their country. That's amazing in itself. And he lives among the Philistines in the royal city. He has so much favor. He has direct access to that king as well. These are the people that he's been to war with. He just cut off the foreskins. He beat their champion. Like, he's done a lot. So when the Bible says in Proverbs 16:7, when a man ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies be at peace with him. That's exactly what happened with David. He was able to remain with the Philistines, even despite the past and the history. He had direct connection. He had favor so much so he's in a royal city. Now let me tell you how deep the favor went. When he was living with them, he went to the king and he says, hey, I wanna live in the country. I don't want to stay in the city. And the king gave him and all his men, his wives, his animals, all that stuff, his own city to live in. Do you hear me? His own city to live in, to manage. Yes, over the Philistines, the ones that he just went to war with when he was with Israel. That's something how the enemy would take better care of you than the king that you sworn yourself to wouldn't. But God always have a plan and a purpose. Always have a plan and a purpose, and we just got to walk in it. So now we see that, okay, Saul's continuing to fall in sin. When Saul found out that David is with the Philistines, he stopped because he's always been afraid of them. He's absolutely afraid of them. He's afraid of Philistines. So at this point, Samuel's dead. And that's the prophet that we spoke of earlier. Saul never saw him again. Samuel dies. So David's with the Philistines. Samuel's dead. And the Philistines gear up and prepare to march on Israel, you guys. Mind you, Saul wasted all of his time chasing David. He didn't develop a relationship with David. And we know that the favor of the Lord is on David. And you know that every time Samuel did a burnt offering, they came out with victory. There's no more Samuel. He dissolved his relationship with David so much so that he's in the camp of the enemy. Okay? He's in the camp of the enemy. So, scary Saul, he gets fearful.